Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, the 31st meeting in 2012 of the Economy, Energy and Tourism Committee. Can I remind everyone, please, to turn off their mobile phones and other electronic devices. Item 1 on the agenda, I wonder if we can have members' agreement to take item 3 in private. Is that agreed?
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda, we are taking evidence this morning on the city strategy from the Scottish Government. And I'd like to welcome Nicola Sturgeon, Cabinet Secretary for Infrastructure, Capital Investment in Cities. And Ms Sturgeon is joined this morning by Morag Watt from the Scottish Government and John Mason. Morag is in charge of city strategy and John is Director of Business. So welcome to you all. Now, before we get into questioning, would you like to say something by way of an opening statement?
I'm happy to do so. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come along today to talk about our city's work. I think I was last here in June last year. At that time, we were at a very early stage of our discussions with cities. I think it's fair to say this is work that's still in its relatively early stages, but nevertheless, a lot of progress has been made since June last year. We've done a lot of work collaboratively with our cities to identify where they felt there was greatest potential for a coherent national approach to deliver increased investment and jobs in our cities. In December last year, we published the Agenda for Cities and established the Scottish Cities Alliance. The Alliance has a leadership strand, a delivery strand, and action teams that drive specific projects. It's supported by all our national agencies and by a self-funded academic collaboration between St Andrews and Glasgow universities. And the Alliance is facilitated by the SCDI. In March, of course, we added to the number of cities when we welcomed Perth to the first meeting of the Cities Alliance Leadership Group, where we agreed our initial priorities. And the initial priorities span the 4 themes of the agenda, which are connectivity, sustainability, knowledge and culture, themes that are key to the international competitiveness of cities and where I think it's fair to say the government and the cities themselves see the greatest potential for collaborative investments. The leadership group last met in late August. There was some new faces around the table following the local authority elections in May, and it was good at that time to hear the commitment and enthusiasm there was from the cities to collaborative working. Members will also be aware that the government is backing the Alliance with a cities investment fund of £7 million. It's important to stress, as I have done before, that that investment fund is very much a catalyst fund designed to overcome some of the barriers to collaboration and to try to accelerate progress. The work we're doing around the cities agenda won't prevent us, of course, working individually with cities as we do with all of Scotland's local authorities. And in that vein, I'm meeting with the leader of Aberdeen City Council this afternoon to discuss some issues pertinent to Aberdeen. But the Alliance does give us a unique opportunity for strategic action to enhance our global competitiveness. It gives a single point of contact for potential investors to access all of our 7 cities and provides the framework for them to work more effectively together as indeed for working together with the government and national agencies. Briefly, just before I stop and take your questions, the initial priorities of the leadership group will be of interest to the committee. The leadership group identified priorities in areas where it's felt we can deliver early benefit and value through a collaborative approach, and they are looking at innovative approaches to increasing investment in cities, using the scale of the cities to improve digital connectivity and ensure that that connectivity then provides benefits to citizens, to businesses and to the economy overall. Thirdly, joining up cities through smarter ticketing, and lastly, exploring how best to use the critical mass of cities to capitalise on the Green Deal and deliver more affordable, warm homes and reduce carbon emissions. The leadership group was very clear on these priorities, but of course there is an appetite to do more as well, and the next meeting of the leadership group will take place in 2 weeks' time, and in due course I'd be happy to update the committee on its deliberations. But I think with that, Convener, I'm happy to move into questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. I'm sure there's a range of issues members will want to ask about. Maybe I could just start off by picking up a couple of things you mentioned in your introduction. First of all, I'm delighted, given my local interest, that you mentioned Perth now being a city. Is it the case that Perth is now fully integrated as part of this strategy, along with the other 6 cities?
Yes, I think it is. I mean, it was entirely coincidental, but nevertheless, it was a good coincidence that Perth gaining or regaining city status came about in the very early stages of the city's work. So it's been involved from a very early stage, and I think it's fair to say it's already proven itself to be a worthwhile and enthusiastic participant in that work.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I ask you about the city's investment fund that you mentioned? And you mentioned the £7 million funding. Is that a per annum funding stream, or is that just a pot of money that's available initially?
It's a pot of money that we've made available for the city's work.
Okay. Can you give us some feeling for what sort of things that money is likely to be spent on? I think it'd be helpful just to get an understanding of the types of initiatives that might help support.
As I said earlier on, it's very much a catalyst fund. It's to be used for things that allow the cities to work together more closely than they perhaps would do without that, to take down some barriers. It might be useful. I can give the committee a breakdown of the money that's been allocated from the fund so far. I should stress this is money that's been allocated. Not very much of it has yet been actually spent, but obviously through the normal channels we'll keep the committee updated. But so far the leadership group has approved just over £1 million to support the delivery of the priority projects I spoke about. So 500,000 for the city's investment work, 326,000 for the digital work, 150,000 for the Green Deal, and 50,000 for integrated energy planning. As I say, these are allocations up to those amounts, and they're designed to allow the Cities Alliance to do things like put together business cases for work in these different areas. This is all detailed in, as I say, the normal way. I'm happy to keep the committee very updated on as it progresses.
Thank you. I think it would be very helpful to the committee just to get that update. Okay, Rhoda Grant.
I suppose a wider question. I mean, some of the things you talk about as part of the strategy and some of the outcomes, it appears to me those are things that local authorities should be doing anyway. What does the city strategy take to the table? What does it add? Where's the value in that? Could we not give the local authorities maybe access to a pot of money for those things themselves? I'm just kind of keen to see, what is the purpose of the exercise?
It's not either or. Local authorities have principal responsibility for a range of these areas, and city authorities within that do. The role and the purpose of the Cities Alliance is to get cities working together where that's appropriate and where they deem that can deliver additional benefits, so that cities are punching above their weight and operating in a way that is greater than the sum of their parts. I mean, if you look at the size of Scottish cities, I mean, they are, in Scottish terms, large conurbations, but in international terms, our cities are relatively small. I mean, if you take all of Scotland's cities together, they don't always even match the size of some of the biggest cities south of the border. So it's about bringing cities together so that they can look to put forward investment propositions that would be on a scale to attract investors in a way that if individual cities were to do it individually wouldn't. It's through looking at, for example, the smart ticketing, an area that involves a lot of collaboration, not just between different parts of Scotland, but between public and private sector operations, different transport operators. It's about ensuring that there's that collaborative approach. So it's not trying to replace the role of individual cities or local authorities more generally. It's about looking at the areas where they can get more advantage by working together than they will ever get working separately.
Your example of, say, smart ticketing, would you see that all the cities would introduce the same scheme, so you could use the same ticketing scheme? And if that's the case, would that not just be better to do for the whole of Scotland?
Yeah. We are looking to do smart ticketing for the whole of Scotland, and you'll recall an announcement a few weeks ago, I think it was, where Transport Scotland is working through a delivery strategy for smart ticketing. benefit of the work, and Dundee is very much in the vanguard of this work in terms of our cities, is to look at how cities can get ahead in that, to accelerate that, to make sure that what they're doing is complementary and works across cities. So, you know, I'm very clear that it's not trying to get in the way of other things. It's not trying to displace activity that is best done at local authority level, but it's recognising that if we want to compete globally, if we want our cities to compete globally, then they need to look at ways that overcome one of the natural disadvantages they have, which is their relative smallness in an international sense. And I believe very strongly that they will do that, or they will help themselves do that by working together. It's not, you know, it's not collaboration for its own sake. There will be times and issues on which it is right for our cities to work individually, to compete with each other but where it makes sense for them to work together, then I think it's right that government encourages that and that they show the willingness to come together and do it.
Ask another question?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I'm interested in the 7 million fund and also in connectivity. I was wondering if the 7 million fund includes the BDUK cities connectivity money that...
No, that's in the separate overall budget for next generation digital broadband, which we're taking forward through the 2 procurement processes that you'll be aware of. But that's not included in the 7 million.
Will that be part of the city strategy? Will all the cities benefit from that, or is it done under the infrastructure?
The cities are very focused on ensuring that the cities get advantage from and benefit from world-class digital infrastructure, but our digital programme is a programme for all of Scotland, and the national fund that's been put together from a variety of sources to support that is designed to benefit all of Scotland.
So what is you talked about connectivity, sustainability, knowledge and culture as being some of the aims of cities. If connectivity is part of the whole, again, I'm saying this is part of the whole Scotland approach. I'm kind of struggling to see what the city's strategy is bringing to the table.
It's getting the cities to look at what they can do differently, what they can do on a faster basis, what they can put together by working collaboratively rather than individually. And you know, I guess if I was sitting here without the buy-in to this of the 7 cities themselves, there may be some more merit in saying this has no advantage, but the cities themselves see an advantage to be got here from looking at where they can pool experience, expertise and put together projects of a scale that is attractive to potential investors. And you know, I think that's a thoroughly positive thing.
I'm not arguing with that. It would just be helpful for the committee to have something tangible that they could understand what was coming out of the strategy, rather than maybe a talking shop where people are just exchanging information.
Well,
another bureaucracy almost.
I mean, I said at the outset, this is work at its early stages. It is absolutely emphatically not a talking shop. You know, the Cities Alliance has the leadership group, which is I sit on with the leaders of the cities, which is giving the strategic overview of the work that the Cities Alliance is doing. It's got a delivery group, which is focused through city officials and taking forward the priorities of the leadership group, and a number of action teams that are looking. Now, it's work in its relatively early stages. I've already said I'll keep the committee very appraised of detail of that, but you know, the fact that we've got cities seeing themselves the benefits. That, I mean, you take the investment work, for example. We know that one of the challenges, not just for cities, but perhaps particularly for cities, is to lever in different sources of investment with public capital under so much pressure. We're already using TIF, for example, as an innovative way of financing infrastructure development, but the cities themselves see a benefit in looking at different forms potentially of financing projects and looking at whether together they can put forward investment propositions of a scale that they wouldn't be able to do individually.
Get all that, and it all sounds wonderful, but I still find it hard to see what it's actually going to physically deliver. And you know, I take what you're saying about its early days, and you're still. But I suppose, what is the vision? What would you see as success from the strategy?
Across all of these, I mean, over the next period, when we get all of our cities with world-class digital infrastructure when, we hopefully, as this work will lead to cities being more innovative and more at the races in terms of attracting investment into big projects. If you take, for example, the Green Deal, cities looking at how they might put together projects collectively that take advantage of the Green Deal and the ability of that to increase the energy efficiency of premises in their areas. So, over time, these are the tangible outcomes that we'll expect to see. I think it's unreasonable to expect those kind of tangible outcomes to have been delivered in the timescale we're talking about, but the preparatory work and the work that is being done, I think, will lead to some very good tangible outcomes that I hope in due course the committee will be able to welcome.
Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I actually believe you gave a fairly positive statement in the outcome. And Cabinet Secretary, you're probably very, very much aware that I'm not from a city constituency, but on the periphery of the city of Aberdeen. Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire work collaboratively together now through ACCEF quite often. But what do you see is the actual positiveness of having a vibrant city, which then sort of generates the economy for its sort of peripheral neighbour, like Aberdeenshire? And do you see the whole city strategy sort of working towards doing similar things in the other areas of Scotland? For instance, when we talk about energy, we tend to talk about Aberdeen being the hub, whereas I always argue, of course, it's Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, because I think they're one and the same when it comes to that. So I'm just wondering, in terms of the city strategy, does the peripheral areas like Aberdeenshire actually buy into that too?
I think it's part of the work of the Cities Alliance to make sure that the city regions, to use that term, the areas around cities that are served by cities but also that serve cities, see the importance of this work to their objectives and to what they are trying to achieve. It's a very clear understanding of all of the work through the cities agenda that it's not just about cities themselves, it's about cities as engines of growth for their own benefit but for the benefit of their surrounding areas. And there's a very clear understanding that, within the framework we've put together for the city's work, city authorities will, liaise with, coordinate with and communicate with their neighbouring authorities to make sure that they're hooked into that work, but understanding the benefits for them as well. The whole impetus of having a focus on cities is very much because of the belief that successful cities lead to a more successful country overall, and that's fundamental to the focus we've put on the city's work.
Thank you for that, Cabinet Secretary. And I think your last statement there basically is, I think for a successful Aberdeenshire, it'll probably thrive in terms of if we have a city at the hub of that survival, and especially within the energy sector. What more do you think can be done? And do you think the example that I've given with the Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire is maybe an example for the other cities to engage? As I mentioned, ACCEF is perhaps a model that I think looks at to be beneficiary in terms of city and shire working together. Is that an example you would encourage other cities to look at?
Absolutely. From what I know of it, I think it is a good model, and it itself grows out of the understanding that Aberdeen can't thrive without Aberdeenshire and vice versa, and the importance of working together is well understood there. So I think it is a model that has broader application, and I would hope that all cities would be looking at, perhaps it's not the case of one model necessarily fitting every other example, but I would certainly hope that all cities were working in that way with their wider regions. I know the city I represent part of in this Parliament, Glasgow, certainly sees its role very much as part of that bigger region that it sits in as well.
Thank you. John Park.
Morning. You said a little bit about how the city strategy interlinks with local government. Could you maybe say a little bit about how it fits with other policies that the Scottish Government will be driving, particularly the economic policy, looking at things such as in your own portfolio around the procurement bill, I suppose the work that it does with Scottish Enterprise, how that all kind of fits together?
It is entirely aligned with our broader economic strategy. You know, our economic strategy is about making sure we're doing everything we can to promote sustainable economic growth. The city strategy, I guess, is a subset of that, in that it recognises that to be successful in doing that, we need these big engines of growth across the country to be performing to their full potential, and it's focusing on making sure that they are taking every opportunity to do that. In terms of, and you mentioned other agencies, you know, the national agencies like Scottish Enterprise are very, you know, hooked into the city's work and are very integral to that. In terms of other policy strands, procurement, for example, I don't think it would be correct to say procurement reform is particular to cities or vice versa. The importance of procurement reform applies right across the economy, not just in making sure that our business base gets the ability to compete successfully for public contracts, but also making sure that we are getting the best value out of the money we're spending through those public contracts, through increased opportunities for training, for jobs, you know, for paying people decent wages. So these are objectives that I wouldn't say are particular to the city's agenda, but as, you know, powerhouses of economic activity and growth, then, you know, it's important that these policies are right for cities.
I'm glad you said that. I mean, I think there are quite good examples of, particularly in terms of procurement from Glasgow and Edinburgh, around skills and training and, you know, things that have come out of that. And the buying power of cities, I think, is something that I would hope you would recognise in that sense as well. One of the things that I'm quite interested in is looking at people who live out with or out in their outlying areas from the city. For example, in the south of Fife, where you have a physical obstacle in terms of going over a bridge into Edinburgh, and quite a lot of people commute there. Is that going to be a key priority of the Alliance, to look at the people who work in the cities but actually live in the outlying areas? Because it tends to be, in my experience, that certainly what I've discovered is quite a lot of people who live in these outlying areas, you know, the opportunities that are there for employment aren't necessarily driven by the strategy that the local authority has taken in the area that they live. Is that something that the Alliance would look at?
I think it's got to be, and it comes back to Dennis Robertson's point about the relationship between cities and their wider regions. You know, cities, if you just use the example of Edinburgh and Fife, I can use, you know, Glasgow and Renfrewshire and Ayrshire. You know, city growth would not be possible without the labour pool that the wider regions provide. So in terms of the economic focus of cities, that's absolutely got to have that very much in mind. You know, when you're looking about things like connectivity, whether that's physical transport connectivity or digital connectivity, that is crucial in making sure that people in the wider regions that serve cities are able to take up those opportunities, and that cities are able to rely on that. So very much that's a focus of the city's work, and underlines the importance of it not just being about cities. I mean, I guess when we embarked on this work, and I think it was something that was expressed the first time I came to the committee, there was I suppose a bit of a concern that people outside of cities would see this as giving cities some kind of preferential treatment, and that it had nothing to do with them. It's very much the opposite of that. This is about seeing what cities performing as well as they should be and as well as they can provide to the whole economy. It's very much about seeing cities as the catalyst for greater growth and greater prosperity in the economy as a whole.
Marco Bianchi.
Following on from that, I really have a question about the Green Deal project that you had mentioned. And obviously, as a city MSP, I'm going to be welcoming as much Green Deal investment into the constituency in the city as happens, and clearly it's a worthy scheme. It needs a bit of institutional support, public initiatives to try and get it going. But in order to defend myself from the allegations of neighbouring MSPs, what is it specifically about being a city that assists in taking advantage of that scheme, where in a way that a similarly sized local authority such as, for example, North Lanarkshire or Fife, you know, what couldn't it do that Edinburgh can do in terms of getting that extra value out of that scheme?
It's not that we just want cities to benefit from the Green Deal. You know, the Green Deal is something I want to see all parts of Scotland benefit from, but you know, the Green Deal is a new way of financing measures to make premises more energy efficient. You know, clearly cities have got a density of population and a density of the kind of properties that will benefit from the Green Deal, and being able to collaborate and come together increases that critical mass that they would be able to use to make themselves attractive to that kind of investment. And obviously they stand to benefit from the kind of jobs that will be created if it works the way we hope it will work through that process. One of the pieces of work the city's delivery group is doing just now is looking at possible business cases for how the cities can collaborate to maximise investment through the Green Deal, and you know, that's an early piece of work that the committee might be interested to look in detail as that business case progresses.
When's that likely to be published?
It's been worked on at the moment. I'm happy to give the committee. As I think the committee knows, the meetings of the leadership group, the notes from these meetings are all being published, and you know, as appropriate, the work that flows from that will be published as well for the committee and others to look at.
Chick Brody.
Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and Mr Mason. Cabinet Secretary, one of the parties to the leadership group is the SCDI. Why was that chosen as opposed to Scottish Enterprise?
You'll recall that SCDI was kind of ahead of the game on this. They were already working to bring the cities together. They'd already established a good relationship with cities. They'd already had, I think, an event where the cities had come together, so they'd established a bit of rapport and a bit of understanding and some appetite amongst the cities to work together. So it was felt that they were the right people to continue to operate in that facilitating role.
The reason I ask that is we're aware that under the previous stewardship, the leadership of Scottish Enterprise, there was a metropolitan strategy which really only aligned Glasgow and Edinburgh, but it sort of fell by the wayside. And I'm wondering, after 18 months after this has been announced, why this will not fall by the wayside.
Well, I believe it will, and you know, at the end of the day, I suppose in a year or 18 months' time, you can have me back here to explain why it hasn't and what demonstrates that it hasn't, and if it has, you'll have me back here to explain why it has. But I've got a lot of faith in this process, and I think it's important that we work with the enthusiasm that the cities themselves are showing. And you know, I'm certainly going to approach this with enthusiasm and with optimism, and I don't think there's any reason at all to take the view that you've just expressed.
I'm sure we all will, but if I can just follow on part of the conversation, part of the question that John Park placed. We have a national economic strategy which is largely bound up, if you look at renewables, tourism, food and drink, largely bound up with rural Scotland. I just wonder where you believe this, where is the economic convergence, spending plan convergence between the cities? Where is the evidence that this will raise their competitiveness? And who prioritises the projects, the large-scale projects? Will the leadership group do that, or will one component decide they want to do something else? The reason I raise that is just recently Glasgow City Council has launched a £1.5 million new business fund, which certainly is looking at the small and medium-sized businesses. But I just wonder, where do the economic and spending plans converge? Do they converge? Under what projects, and who will prioritise the projects?
Let me answer that question in a number of ways. I mean, you talk about some of the priorities of the National Economic Strategy, renewables, life sciences, for example. Yes, these are sectors of the economy that have got enormous benefits for rural areas. But, you know, speaking as a Glasgow MSP, renewables has got enormous potential. It's got, you know, pretty significant reality at the moment for that city as well. So I don't think it's always correct to categorise these big sectors as being rural or urban. If we play our cards right, these sectors benefit all of the economy. In terms of your other question about, you know, if all of the economic focus is rural based, then why focus on cities? Well, I don't think it is all rural based.
I just said that a large part of our economic strategy is rural based. I didn't say that I disavow the city strategy. I'm just saying, yeah, where's the balance?
Yeah, well, I was about to answer that, because I don't think it is accurate to characterise it in that way, and I've just used the example of renewables to say that. But, you know, you look at the impact of cities on the economy overall, 67% of GVA, 60% of exports, 60% of jobs accounted for in cities. So we'd be absolutely mad not to try to make sure that our cities were performing to their potential individually, but also looking at ways that they can punch above their weight by working together more cleverly. Now, who decides on these things? Well, the city's work is not trying to, and has never been designed to get in the way of cities setting their own local priorities. I, a few weeks ago, had the opportunity to speak at the launch of Edinburgh's economic strategy for Edinburgh, and you know, that was a good event. Very clear focus on the things that this city thinks it has to do to increase its economic potential and improve its economic performance. What the Cities Alliance is seeking to do is look to see where you can add value to the individual efforts of cities by the cities choosing themselves to collaborate. And in terms of the areas and the projects and the priorities that will be taken forward through the cities' work, it's the structure that I've announced already today, headed by the leadership group that will decide the priorities. So the priorities I've already spoken about today were decided through the leadership group and are being taken forward through the delivery group and the action teams that lie underneath that.
I ask then that based on the conversation, based on the point I made earlier about the metropolitan strategy, which was actually founded originally in Maryland in the States and and cities in the on the eastern seaboard, that there be an investigation as to how successful that has been in terms of raising their competitiveness. Just one last question is, in terms of measurement and impact, what do you see as the anticipated outcomes? Who's going to measure that? In terms of how well the overall strategy is working?
It will be for the government to report to Parliament on these outcomes, and you know, the work that I've spoken about today, we will, over the time that work progresses, report on the outcomes. And to go back to Rhoda Grant's question, be able to demonstrate the tangible outcomes of that. In terms of your question about the metropolitan strategy in Maryland, I'm more than happy to look into that. As I said earlier on, one of the aspects and one of the features of the city's work is the St Andrews and Glasgow University collaboration around the knowledge component of this, which is looking at academic studies, looking at the best evidence from elsewhere of how cities are doing this, in order that we in Scotland can learn from that. So I'm happy to feed that in as something that could be looked at.
Mike Mackenzie.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. As you know, I'm not really a city boy, or haven't been for many years, and it strikes me that looking at our cities, that they're really quite sophisticated and complex machines, and I just wondered in terms of our vision for the future of our cities, because I understand part of this is about innovation and looking at a better future for cities. Are there lessons from elsewhere in Europe or perhaps across the world?
Well, I think there are lots of lessons. It goes back to Chick's question. I think there are lots of lessons that are. I'm not going to start naming individual cities, because that would maybe sound as if I was setting myself up for lots of fact-finding missions or something, which I've resisted the temptation of. But there are, lots of examples of how cities are doing transport better, how they are doing digital better, how they're working together with other cities better than we have traditionally done. And that's why the academic arm of this that I've spoken about is important, because it means that as the Cities Alliance continues its work, it is looking outwards and looking at best practice from elsewhere and where that might be applicable here. One of the things the leadership group has spoken about is at its meetings, having people from elsewhere come in to talk about the things that are working well and being done innovatively in other cities. And I think it's really vital that we don't be insular in this. It's not a case of Edinburgh learning from Glasgow or Glasgow learning from Edinburgh. There might be some of that, but it's about looking to emulate the best in the world in terms of how cities go about their business.
Thank you. And just one more question, if you don't mind. I have as I'm sure we all have, I'm thinking of a particular constituent that writes to me regularly on one theme, and and unfortunately I can't bring them to mind, but he supplied me with a list of cities who follow the practice of having ducting alongside their roads. And the idea is that all the services for these cities run, the gas pipes, the water pipes, the cables and so on, run in these ducts. And the idea is that every time you want to upgrade something or improve something, you don't need to dig up the road and in the course of that break the gas main, break the water main, and that disruption and actually the economic cost of that. These cities seem to manage to avoid that. And I just wondered if that could be, just on for the benefit of my constituent, could that be one of these lessons that we'll learn from these, seemingly smarter cities?
I think there'll be utility companies across the country starting to scream in horror if I start to say too much about how best they should do their piping and their ducting and everything. I would say, though, I don't know what cities you're talking about. If you can dig out your constituent correspondence and send it to me, I'd be very happy to look at that. We should look at good ideas from elsewhere. I can't sit here right now and promise you that is one of them that the city's work will be able to take forward, but I'd be certainly happy to look at it.
Thank you. I appreciate the complexity of trying to resolve that, but equally, I can see the point of view as well, and I could see the benefits. So, thank you.
From what you've said, I could certainly see the attractions of it, so I'm more than happy if you want to pass on the correspondence to have it looked at.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Dennis Robertson wants to come in with a supplementary, but not, I think, on the ducting issue.
Perhaps not on the ducting, but maybe it's something we should consider for the AWPR, Cabinet Secretary.
It says you don't get good ideas at committees.
It was really an answer you gave to Mike McKenzie about the leaderships, etc. With Scottish Enterprise, there's quite a lot of focus on global Scots and ambassadors. Do you see them playing a role in this leadership, and if so, what kind of role?
That's a very good point, and that's not something I've given huge thought to yet, but I think it's something I'm quite happy to. It's something I'll take away from here. We've got that network of global ambassadors, the SDI network, and in every aspect of what we're trying to do in terms of economic growth, it would be sensible to use that. So I'm very happy to take that away as a suggestion.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. You've highlighted the relative smallness of our cities in global terms, but our biggest city, the one you're very closely associated with, will be showcased internationally in 2014. The Government's committed to delivering the Cycle Action Plan for Scotland, and in particular meeting the target of 10% of all journeys by bike by 2020. Do you see really positive benefits to the Games and really developing a meaningful legacy of cycling and walking using that Cycle Action Plan and the fact that these global Games will take place in Glasgow?
Yes, I do. I had a good discussion with the Infrastructure Committee when I gave evidence to them on the budget around this, and I was able to say to them that we remain committed to that 10%. I also acknowledge we've got a long way to go to meet that. I think Edinburgh, in fact, is closest to that. Apologies if I quote this figure wrong, but I think from memory they're already at about 7%. So they are demonstrating that it can be done. I went through with the Infrastructure Committee some of the budget commitments that we've made around cycling and walking. People who are passionate about cycling and walking will rightly say they don't think we're doing enough and we need to do more, and I'm conscious of that. We're operating within a very tight budget, but we have a commitment to maximise support for cycling and walking as much as we can, and I absolutely agree with you that the Commonwealth Games is a fantastic opportunity to encourage not just cycling and walking but activity more generally, and through the Commonwealth Games legacy, the government's with our partners in the Commonwealth Games is certainly trying to do that.
I think it's universally acknowledged that the London Games ran really smoothly because of the way they managed traffic demand. Do you know what steps are being taken to ensure that we won't see Glasgow severely impacted by congestion, and if there are steps being taken in advance to make sure that Glasgow's current air quality problems are addressed?
All of these different aspects of the Commonwealth Games are being taken forward by the organising committee. I'd be happy to get a briefing prepared for the committee on the specific points you've raised around traffic management. Obviously, it's very important. Glasgow's different to London on scale and in terms of how the Games will be organised, but nevertheless, it's important. And on the other points you raised, so if it's of interest to the committee, we can get some information provided on that. What the organising committee in Glasgow are doing and have been doing in the run-up to and through the Olympic Games, of course, is making sure that we're learning lessons as appropriate from what was the very successful staging of those games. So these things are all very much in the mix of the preparations for the Commonwealth Games that are now very well advanced.
I might just have one further question, Convener. Mike Mackenzie mentioned a vision for our cities. And we've been discussing economic growth and benefits in that sort of area. But I just wonder if the city strategy will look at questions like, is there an optimal city size? Are there strengths and weaknesses in the cities that we have in this country? What's the optimal distance for a citizen to be from a park or a green space, or access to play facilities? I'd just be interested to know, as well as economic issues, if we're looking at cultural and well-being issues.
I think it's important that is part of the work. I mean, the city work just now is focused on some very particular strands of work that I've already spoken about, because I'm very conscious of the fact, as is the Alliance generally, that we need to demonstrate, I believe 100% in the value of this work, but we need to demonstrate it through tangible outcomes, and that is a key focus. But the reason that the academic strand is being built into this is to make sure there is that bigger focus in terms of city vision, how cities work optimally in terms of their relationship with their own citizens and their wider area, what makes city living attractive, what would make it more attractive, how you ensure quality of life in a city. These are all really important things in terms of the longer term vision we have for cities and where they sit in the overall realm of the country. So I think that side of the work is very important.
Okay. If there are no other supplementary, I've got one other question I would like to ask, which is to do with the European Commission communication we've been made aware of on Smart Cities and Communities European Innovation Partnership, which I'm sure you'll be familiar with, Cabinet Secretary. I'm just wondering if you're aware of any EU initiatives or funding streams that might be available to Scottish cities to help support the strategy and the work that's going forward.
One of the things we want the Cities Alliance to do, and one of the values of collaboration, is to make sure that we are well placed to take advantage of any European funding that is coming. I'm happy to provide the committee with a kind of detailed list of, across these different areas, what the potential areas of European funding might be and how the particular strands of work that the Alliance is doing might help to realise some of that.
That would be very helpful. Chick Brody's just caught my eye with a supplementary.
Sorry, one last question, if I may. Cabinet Secretary, on what basis have some of the smaller cities, such as Inverness, been selected for inclusion within the agenda as compared with larger towns like Ayr, for example? And what benefits does city status bring?
Well, I don't determine city status for areas. Areas that have city status are included in the city's work for what I think will be pretty obvious reasons. They are cities. So that's the basis for inclusion. As a Glasgow MSP who was nevertheless born and bred in Ayrshire, if you want to start a campaign for city status for Ayr, you might find a enthusiastic supporter sitting in this seat, although my hometown of Irvine might have something to say about it. Certainly Ayr has the finest football club in the country. I would go as far as to say that.
Dennis Robertson.
Cabinet Secretary, with regard to the funding aspect, I think you probably agree that some of our cities and city centres are a bit tired. And if I look at Aberdeen in particular, there was an opportunity to maybe to upgrade and uplift that city centre. how much involvement do you expect from the business communities in engaging with the infrastructure upgrades within our cities?
That's critical. I mean, and the input of private sector to the success of the city's work will be crucial, because it is about looking at how we factor in more investment to our cities, whether that's in town centre infrastructure or the other bits of infrastructure that cities rely on. In parallel to the city's work, of course, we've got the town centre review underway, which is looking at what we can do innovatively to breathe life into our town centres, not just in cities, but town centres across the country. And I'm certainly looking forward to the outcome of that work, and I'm sure there'll be some tie-up between that and the city's work in due course.
Okay, well, I think we've run out of questions. Cabinet Secretary, can I just say, before thanking you, I thought that was a model of how these sessions should be conducted in terms of its succinct and to-the-point questions and equally succinct and to-the-point answers. So thank you very much for coming along this morning. Thank you to your officials as well. And we look forward to hearing from you in relation to the various points that we agreed to follow up. Okay, item 3 is in private session, so I suggest we take a short suspension. Thank you.